A bobcat recognized the man who saved him and begged for help, and the reason why broke everyone. Years ago, a simple act of mercy in the wild should have been forgotten. But when the scarred animal suddenly reappears, it isn't by chance, it's desperate, and what the man discovers when he follows will shake him to his core. What begins as a fight to protect one wounded creature explodes into a battle against forces far more dangerous than he ever imagined. Dark secrets rise from the shadows, secrets tied to betrayal, cruelty, and a truth that could destroy everything he thought he knew about his past. Now, he faces not only physical danger, but a devastating revelation that changes the meaning of everything. Why did the bobcat return to him? What horrifying truth was hidden all these years? And when the final moment comes, will he have the strength to survive the enemy waiting in the dark? You being here is a reminder. The quiet acts of love and kindness still matter. If you hold space for compassion, you're already part of this community. Through the dusty window of his modest home in the Arizona foothills, Red Callahan watched the sunset paint the desert sky in shades of orange and purple, his calloused hands wrapped around a coffee mug that had long since gone cold, just like the empty spaces in his life that seemed to grow larger with each passing day. The small house felt especially quiet tonight. Most evenings, Red could lose himself in the routine of making dinner or catching up on paperwork from the construction site, but today marked 5 years since Sarah's passing, and memories refused to stay buried. You'll never be good enough. For her, Sarah's father's words still echoed in his mind, sharp as the day they were spoken at their wedding reception. The wealthy family had made their disapproval clear from the start. A simple construction worker couldn't possibly deserve their daughter. Red's eyes drifted to the worn photo on his mantle, showing Sarah's radiant smile on their wedding day. They were wrong about us, he whispered to the empty room. We were happy. His mind wandered back to that day 3 years before meeting Sarah, when he was working a logging job up in the mountains. The memory was as clear as mountain water, the sound of branches cracking under his boots, the fresh scent of pine, and the desperate thrashing that caught his attention. He found the bobcat caught in an illegal snare, its leg bloody where the wire had cut deep. The animal's fierce eyes had locked onto his, not with hatred, but with a wild dignity that struck him to his core. His foreman had shouted from down the slope, "Leave it. We're behind schedule as it is." But Rhett couldn't. Something in those eyes demanded more from him than just walking away. "Easy now," he murmured. Approaching slowly, the bobcat had gone still, watching him. Using his work gloves and wire cutters, he'd carefully freed the animal, knowing full well what it would cost him. The foreman had been furious, writing him up for insubordination and wasting company time. The incident had followed Rhett, making it harder to find steady work in an industry where reputation meant everything. Worth it, Rhett said aloud to his reflection in the window, remembering how the bobcat had paused at the edge of the clearing, turning back to meet his gaze one final time before disappearing into the underbrush. That moment had felt like a sacred exchange, a recognition between two souls that transcended the usual boundaries between wild and tame. He set his mug in the sink, his movements measured and deliberate. The construction company where he now worked was steady employment, if not prestigious. His co-workers were decent enough, though they saw him as just another pair of hands, reliable. Quiet Rhett who never made waves and never shared much about his past. The house creaked as the desert night cooled. Rhett moved to his small desk, where a stack of bills waited. Sarah's medical expenses had drained their savings, and her family's offer to help had come with too many strings attached. Their conditions would have meant admitting they'd been right about him all along, that he couldn't provide, couldn't measure up. "I miss you," he said softly, touching the edge of the wedding photo. "But I couldn't let them win. Not even then." The quiet strength that had helped him free the bobcat was the same strength that had let him refuse their money, their conditions, their judgment. It was a deeper kind of strength that most people recognized, not the showy kind that won applause, but the kind that let a man stand his ground when standing alone. Outside, a coyote's call split the darkness. Red thought again of the bobcat, wondering if it had survived, if the scar on its leg had healed clean. Strange how a brief encounter could leave such a lasting mark on a person's soul. That decision, made in a heartbeat but felt for years after, has shown him something about himself that he needed to know. He was more than what Sarah's family saw when they looked at him. More than just the calluses on his hands or the modest number in his bank account. That moment with the bobcat had proven it. When tested, he'd chosen compassion over convenience, right over easy. The construction site would be waiting early tomorrow. Rhett prepared for bed with the same quiet efficiency he brought to everything, setting out his work clothes, checking his lunch cooler. But as he moved through his evening routine, he felt the weight of the day's memories settling into something Like Peace thought the choice he'd made that day in the mountains might have cost him professionally, but it had helped him face every challenge since, including the cruel whispers at Sarah's funeral about the widower who couldn't even afford a proper headstone at first. They hadn't understood that sometimes a man's worth had nothing to do with money. As Rhett turned out the lights, the desert wind whispered around his house's corners, carrying the wild scents of sage and stone. That long ago Bobcat had taught him something vital. Dignity didn't come from other people's approval. It came from being true to yourself, especially when no one else understood. He laid down in his bed, listening to the night sounds of the Arizona foothills. Tomorrow would be another day of hard work and quiet perseverance. But tonight, remembering both his losses and his choices, Rhett Callahan knew with bone-deep certainty that he'd stayed true to who he really was. Sometimes that had to be enough. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty service road as Rhett guided his work truck through the winding canyon. This delivery run to the remote construction site was routine. Drop off the specialty lumber and head back before dark. The radio crackled with static between country songs, providing a familiar backdrop to the lonely drive. Rhett slowed the truck as he approached a sharp bend, the tires crunching over loose gravel. That's when he heard it, a sound that didn't belong among the usual desert noises. A series of desperate, high-pitched cries echoed off the canyon walls. He pulled over, cutting the engine. The cries came again, closer now. Something about them raised the hair on the back of his neck. They weren't the playful yips of coyotes or the screech of a hawk. These sounds carried raw desperation. Movement caught his eye at the edge of the scrub brush. Red's breath caught in his throat. A bobcat emerged from the shadows, its muscular frame moving with obvious pain. One back leg dragged slightly, and dark patches matted its tawny fur. But what struck Rhett most was the distinctive scar around its neck, a mark he'd never forgotten. "It can't be," he whispered. The bobcat locked eyes with him, and in that moment, Rhett knew. This was the same animal he'd freed from the snare years ago. The recognition seemed mutual. Instead of fleeing, the bobcat paced anxiously, looking back toward the deeper canyon before returning its intense gaze to Rhett. "What's wrong, buddy?" Rhett spoke softly, slowly emerging from the truck. The bobcat's behavior was completely unnatural. Wild animals, especially injured ones, should flee from humans. But this one seemed determined to get his attention. The bobcat limped a few steps toward the canyon, then looked back at Rhett with an almost human urgency. When Rhett didn't move, it repeated the motion, more insistent this time. "You want me to follow you?" The words felt ridiculous leaving his mouth, like something from a children's story. But the bobcat's behavior left little doubt. Rhett grabbed his backpack from the truck, checking that his first aid kit and flashlight were inside. Years of working in construction had taught him to stay prepared. He locked the truck and took a deep breath. "All right then, lead the way." The bobcat guided him along a narrow game trail that wound deeper into the canyon. The terrain grew increasingly treacherous. Loose scree gave way to steep drops, and thorny brush tore at his clothes. The sun dipped lower, casting strange shadows that played tricks with depth perception. Every instinct screamed that this was dangerous, foolish even. But something stronger drove him forward, perhaps the same impulse that had made him stop. To free the bobcat years ago, the animal moved with purpose, constantly checking to ensure Rhett followed. Rhett followed. After 20 minutes of careful hiking, the bobcat froze. Its ears swiveled forward, and its muscles tensed. Rhett crouched instinctively, sensing the change. Ahead, voices carried on the evening air, rough, male voices speaking in low tones. The bobcat led him on a more circuitous route, staying in the deepest shadows. As they crested a small rise, Rhett's blood ran cold at what lay below. A camp had been set up in a natural hollow, hidden from the main canyon. 3 rough-looking men moved between a collection of large cages and crates. Inside, Rhett could make out the forms of various animals, a young mountain lion, several wolves, and in one cage, another bobcat. This one lay unnaturally still, its breathing labored. "That's why you brought me here," Rhett breathed, looking at his bobcat guide. "That's your mate." The scene before him made his stomach turn. The animals were clearly destined for illegal wildlife trafficking, exotic pets for wealthy collectors who didn't care about the cruelty involved. Some of the creatures showed signs of sedation, while others paced their cages in obvious distress. The poachers had weapons. Rhett could see at least 2 rifles propped against a nearby tree. Their camp was well organized, suggesting this wasn't a temporary operation. They'd chosen their location carefully, far from regular patrol routes but accessible enough for transport. One of the men approached the cage containing the injured bobcat, and Rhett's guide tensed beside him. A low growl rumbled in its throat, barely contained. Rhett placed a gentle hand near, but not touching the animal's flank. Easy, he whispered. We can't help if we give ourselves away. The bobcat subsided, but its eyes never left its mate's cage. Rhett carefully documented everything he could see, using his phone to take photos when he was certain the flash wouldn't give him away. He noted distinguishing features of the men, the layout of their camp, and the number and types of animals they held captive. The situation was far bigger than anything he could handle alone. One wrong move could end with him joining the animals in those cages, or worse. He needed to get back to his truck and contact the authorities. But as he watched the suffering animals and thought of how many others might have passed through this camp, Rhett knew he couldn't simply walk away. He would return, and this time, he would bring help. The bobcat seemed to sense his decision. It gave him one last meaningful look before melting into the shadows, likely heading back to keep watch over its mate. Rhett began his careful retreat, marking landmarks to help guide law enforcement back to this hidden camp of horrors. His heart pounded with each step, knowing that discovery would be disastrous. The images of those caged animals and the trust of the scarred bobcat who had sought him out drove him forward. Once again, he found himself caught up in something larger than himself, all because of a single act of kindness years ago. The fading light made the return journey treacherous, but Rhett moved with purpose. He had to get help before the poachers moved their operation. The weight of what he discovered pressed heavily on his shoulders, along with the responsibility of doing something about it. Rhett's hands trembled as he crouched behind a large boulder, his breath coming in short, controlled bursts. The discovery of the poaching operation had left him reeling, his mind racing between fight and flight. These weren't just random criminals, they were organized, well-equipped, and clearly dangerous. Every rational thought urged him to leave, to get as far away from this situation as possible. He was a construction worker, not a hero. What could one man possibly do against an operation of this scale? But before he could retreat, voices drifted up from the camp below. The men had gathered around a satellite phone, their tones urgent and deferential. Mr. Morrell wants an update on the shipment, one of them said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. Rhett's blood turned to ice. Morrell, Gavin Morrell. His brother-in-law's name hit him like a physical blow, sending him staggering back against the rock face. Tell him we're on schedule, another man responded. 3 wolves, 1 mountain lion, and 2 bobcats ready for transport, plus the other merchandise from last month's haul. He's getting impatient. Says his buyers are willing to pay double for rush delivery. Rhett's mind spun with the implications. Gavin Morrell, the man who had sneered at him for years, who had called him nothing but a common laborer, was behind this. The same man who had made it his mission to remind Rhett that he would never be good enough for his sister. Memories flooded back. Gavin's cold smile at family gatherings. The way he had systematically tried to isolate Rhett and his wife from the family's wealth and connections. After his wife's death, Gavin had been the one to ensure Rhett received nothing from her estate, citing ironclad prenuptial agreements and family trust. Now here was the truth of it. Gavin's wealth wasn't just from legitimate ranching. He was financing this operation, profiting from the suffering of these animals. The realization made Rhett's stomach churn. His hands clenched into fist as he listened to more details emerge. The poachers discussed drop points, payment arrangements, and scheduling, all coordinated through Gavin. They mentioned specific properties owned by shell companies, locations Rhett recognized from his construction work in the area. The pieces were falling into place, revealing a network of illegal activities all leading back to his brother-in-law. The scarred bobcat materialized beside him, as if sensing his distress. Its presence steadied him, reminded him of what was truly at stake. This wasn't just about his personal history with Gavin anymore. It was about right and wrong, about standing up against cruelty and greed. Through the gathering dusk, Rhett watched the poachers continue their work. They moved between the cages, checking locks and administering what appeared to be sedatives to some of the more agitated animals. The injured bobcat in the cage barely moved, and Rhett could see his companion's muscles tense with each pain sound from its mate. Mr. Morrell's got big plans, one of the men said, lighting a cigarette. Says this is just the beginning. Once we clear this batch, he's looking to expand operations across 3 more states. Good money and exotic pets, another replied. Rich folks will pay anything for something unique. And if some of the merchandise doesn't survive transport, well, there's always more where they came from. Their casual cruelty made Rhett's jaw clench. He thought of his wife, how she had always seen the best in her brother despite his faults. What would she think if she could see what Gavin had become? Or had he always been this way, hiding his true nature behind wealth and social standing? The revelation changed everything. Rhett couldn't walk away now, not when he finally understood. the scope of what he was dealing with. Gavin Morrell had spent years looking down on him, treating him as beneath notice. Perhaps that would prove to be his biggest mistake. The sun had nearly set, casting long shadows across the canyon. The poachers began settling in for the night, setting up watch rotations. Red knew he needed to move soon, while he still had enough light to navigate safely back to his truck. The Bobcat beside him rose silently, preparing to disappear back into the wilderness. Before it left, it fixed Rhett with an intense stare that seemed to carry a clear message. What are you going to do about this? It was a question Rhett had to answer carefully. Going to the authorities was necessary, but he knew Gavin's influence ran deep in local politics and law enforcement. Any move against him would have to be carefully planned and executed. As he began his cautious retreat from the poachers' camp, Rhett's mind was already working through possibilities. He had evidence now, photos and recordings on his phone, locations, names he'd overheard. Most importantly, he had something Gavin would never expect, the motivation of a man with nothing left to lose. Driven by both justice and personal vendetta, the Bobcat's trust in him, leading him to this discovery, felt like more than coincidence. It felt like purpose, like the universe offering him a chance to right multiple wrongs at once. The path ahead would be dangerous, but for the first time in years, Rhett felt truly alive. The weight of his discovery pressed heavily on him as he picked his way through the darkening canyon. Each step took him further from the immediate danger of the poachers' camp, but closer to a confrontation years in the making. Gavin Morrell had always thought himself untouchable, protected by his wealth and status. He had never considered that his carefully constructed world might be threatened by someone he had dismissed as insignificant. Rhett's truck bounced along the dusty road toward the Wildlife Services office, hope warring with doubt in his chest. The small building sat on the outskirts of town, its faded brown paint peeling in the Arizona sun. He'd spent the morning gathering his evidence, photos, recordings, and detailed notes about the location of the poachers' camp. Inside the air conditioning hummed weakly as he approached the front desk. The wildlife officer, Dave Martinez, listened to Rhett's story with increasing discomfort, his expression growing more troubled with each detail. Look, Mr. Callahan, Martinez said, shifting in his chair. I believe you saw what you saw. But going after someone like Gavin Morrell, he shook his head. My hands are tied here. There are animals suffering right now. Rhett pressed, spreading the photos across the desk. Surely you can do something. Martinez glanced at the door before lowering his voice. Last month, we had a solid case against one of Morrell's operations. Evidence disappeared from our office. The judge who was supposed to sign the warrant suddenly went on vacation. Things happen when you cross certain people. Rhett's heart sank. He'd feared this response, but hearing it confirmed made his blood boil. So everyone just looks the other way. I'm sorry. I really am. Martinez gathered the photos and handed them back. My advice, forget what you saw. Some fights aren't worth picking. Outside, Rhett sat in his truck, gripping the steering wheel, until his knuckles turned white. The sheriff's office would be no better. He'd heard rumors about generous donations to the re-election campaign. Gavin's tentacles of influence reached everywhere money could buy loyalty. A memory surfaced. Elena Ruiz, the local veterinarian, she'd treated his dog years ago, refusing payment when she learned he was struggling after his wife's death. More importantly, she'd never bought into the town's whispers about him being a nobody who'd married above his station. The veterinary clinic was a modest building on the edge of town, surrounded by desert scrub and a few hardy trees. Through the window, Rhett could see Elena examining a cat, her movements gentle but confident. She looked up as the bell chimed, recognition lighting her warm brown eyes. Rhett Callahan, she said, finishing up with her patient. It's been a while. He waited until the cat's owner left before speaking. I need your help, Dr. Ruiz, and I need to know I can trust you. Elena's expression grew serious. Of course, and please, it's Elena. Over the next hour, Rhett shared everything. The Bobcats returned, the discovery of the camp and Gavin's involvement. Elena listened intently, her face darkening with each new detail. I've treated some of the animals they've abandoned, she said quietly. When the rich buyers realize exotic pets are more than they can handle. The conditions you're describing, she shook her head. It's barbaric. The authorities won't help, Rhett explained. Gavin's got them all in his pocket. Elena stood, pacing the small exam room. So what are you planning to do? I don't know yet. But I can't walk away. That Bobcat trusted me enough to show me what was happening. I owe it to do something. She stopped pacing, studying him thoughtfully. You know this could be dangerous. Gavin Morrell isn't known for his forgiveness. I'm aware. Reb met her gaze steadily. But someone has to stand up to him. Elena was quiet for a long moment, then nodded decisively. I'll help you. Those animals need medical care, and you'll need documentation of their conditions for evidence. She smiled slightly. Besides, it's about time someone showed Gavin Morell he's not untouchable. Relief flooded through Rhett. He wasn't alone anymore. Thank you. I know I'm asking a lot. You're asking me to do what's right. Elena interrupted. That's never too much. She moved to her desk, pulling out a notepad. Now, tell me everything you remember about the injuries you saw. We need to be prepared. They spent the next 2 hours planning, Elena's medical knowledge helping identify what supplies they need. Her practical questions helped Rhett focus, turning his anger into purpose. We'll need to be careful, Elena warned as the sun began to set. Gavin has eyes everywhere in this town. Rhett nodded, understanding the risk she was taking by helping him. I won't let anything happen to you. I know. Her faith in him was steady, unflinching. We'll figure this out together. As Rhett left the clinic, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Hope, Elena's belief in him. Her willingness to stand beside him against Gavin's corruption gave him strength. The path ahead was dangerous, but he wasn't walking it alone anymore. The scarred Bobcat had led him to the truth. Elena would help him deliver justice. And somewhere, Rhett suspected, his wife would be proud of him for finally standing up to her brother's cruelty. The sun had barely risen when Elena opened her clinic's back door to let Rhett in. Her eyes were tired but determined as she spread a map across her examination table. The canyon creates a natural bottleneck here, she explained, tracing the paper with her finger. If they're moving animals out, they'll have to use these access roads. Rhett leaned closer, noting how Elena had already marked potential surveillance points in red pen. Her thoroughness surprised him. She'd clearly been up all night working on this. We need proof, Elena continued, running a hand through her dark hair. Photos of the cages, license plates, anything that links back to Gavin. Without solid evidence, no one will touch him. It's dangerous, Rhett said quietly. You don't have to get involved. Elena's warm brown eyes met his. I've watched too many injured animals come through my door, Rhett, and I've watched this town bow to Gavin Morell for too long. Sometimes doing the right thing means taking risks. They spent the next hour plotting observation points and timing patterns. Elena's medical knowledge would be crucial. She could document the animal's conditions and provide expert testimony. If they succeeded in building a case, we'll need to be careful, Rhett cautioned. These men are armed. So were you once, Elena said softly. When Rhett looked startled, she added, Sarah mentioned you served before construction work. Rhett's jaw tightened. He buried those memories, along with his wife, preferring the simplicity of physical labor to the complexities of his military past. But now, watching Elena's quiet courage, something stirred in him, a forgotten sense of purpose, of fighting for something larger than himself. The next morning, Rhett parked his truck at the agreed-upon spot and began his hike toward the first observation point. Elena would be monitoring the main road, ready to photograph any vehicles entering or leaving the area. He was halfway to his position when the first shot cracked through the air. Rhett dropped instinctively, years of training suddenly flooding. Back as bark exploded from a tree near his head. Thought you could play hero, didn't you? Gavin's voice carried across the canyon. Always trying to rise above your station. More shots followed. Rhett rolled behind a boulder, his heart pounding. Through the dust, he caught glimpses of 3 men moving through the trees, trying to flank him. Gavin must have had the camp watched. After spotting Rhett's earlier visit, without conscious thought, Rhett's body remembered its training. He moved silently through the underbrush, using the terrain to his advantage. When one of the men passed too close, Rhett struck a quick, efficient takedown that left his attacker unconscious. The second man charged with the knife. Rhett blocked, twisted, and disarmed him in a fluid motion that surprised even himself. These weren't the movements of a simple construction worker. They were the precise, lethal techniques he'd learned in special operations, skills he'd thought long forgotten. Who the hell is this guy? He heard one of the men shout. Rhett used their confusion to break contact, leading them away from where he knew Elena would be watching. He crossed a stream to mask his trail, scaled a steep embankment, and finally circled back toward his truck dot when he reached Elena's clinic 2 hours later. She gasped at the sight of his torn clothes and bleeding scratches. I heard the shots, she said, pulling him inside. I was so worried. As she cleaned his wounds, Rhett saw something new in her eyes. Not just concern, but a deeper understanding. She glimpsed the man beneath his quiet exterior, someone capable of both compassion and combat. You're not just the person they say you are you? She asked softly. Red met her gaze. Neither are you. In that moment, something shifted between them, a recognition of shared strength, of possibilities beyond the roles they'd been assigned. But before either could speak further, Elena's phone buzzed with an urgent text. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows as Rhett sat in his truck, parked behind Elena's clinic. His hands trembled as he stared at the stack of papers she had helped him obtain: property records, accident reports, and financial documents spread across his dashboard like pieces of a sinister puzzle. It can't be, he whispered, but the evidence was undeniable. The accident that had taken his wife's life 5 years ago, the brake failure that sent her car off the mountain road, hadn't been an accident at all. Rhett's eyes fixed on a maintenance receipt from Gavin's personal mechanic, dated just 2 days before the crash. The same mechanic who had mysteriously left town immediately after the investigation. His throat tightened as he found bank transfers showing large sums moving from Gavin's accounts to offshore holdings. The dates aligned perfectly, one payment before the crash, another after the estate had been transferred to Gavin's control. Red's hands clenched the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. The memory of Gavin's cold smile at the funeral now took on a horrifying new meaning. While Red had been drowning in grief, Gavin had been celebrating his successful plan. Elena knocked gently on the truck's window, making him jump. He unlocked the door, and she climbed into the passenger seat, her face grave. I found something else, she said softly, pulling out another document. The family trust had a clause. If your wife died without children, everything would revert to Gavin. He knew exactly what he was doing. Red's voice was hoarse. We were trying to start a family. She had just told me. He couldn't finish the sentence. Eleanor reached over and squeezed his hand. There's more. The poaching operation, it started right after he got control of the estate. He needed quick cash to cover his tracks, to pay off people who might talk. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The illegal wildlife trade wasn't just about profit. It was part of a larger web of corruption that had begun with his wife's murder. Gavin hadn't just killed his sister. He'd built an empire on her death. All these years, Rhett said, his voice breaking. I blamed myself. Thought if I'd been a better husband, come from a better family, maybe she'd still be alive. Hot tears spilled down his cheeks, but it was him, her own brother. The grief that had weighed him down for 5 years transformed into something else. A burning rage that cleared his mind like a forest fire. He saw everything now. How Gavin had used his wealth and influence to silence questions. How he'd manipulated the investigation. How he turned the family's disapproval of Rhett into a shield for his own guilt. The Bobcat, Rhett realized suddenly. That's why it came to me. It knew somehow. Knew I'd lost someone too. Elena studied his face carefully. What are you going to do? Rhett folded the papers carefully, tucking them into his jacket. The weight of the truth settled over him like armor. What I should have done 5 years ago. Fight back. We'll need more than papers, Elena warned. Gavin's got the sheriff in his pocket, half the judges in the county. Then we'll get more. Rhett said, his voice steady for the first time in years. The poaching operation, the offshore accounts, the mechanic, there's a trail. We just have to follow it. He started the truck's engine, the familiar rumble grounding him in the present moment. The sun was setting behind the mountains where his wife had died. But for the first time since losing her, Rhett felt truly awake. She deserved better. He said quietly, they all do. The animals, the people he's hurt. It stops now. Elena nodded, her expression determined. I'll help you. Whatever it takes. As they drove away from the clinic, Rhett felt the last pieces of his old self. The grieving widower, the man who blamed himself, fall away. In their place stood someone new, a man with purpose, with clarity, with a mission that would either bring justice or end him. The truth about Gavin hadn't just revealed a killer. It had awakened a warrior. And somewhere in the gathering dusk, a scarred Bobcat watched them go, as if knowing the battle that was about to begin. The night air hung thick with anticipation as Rhett and Elena crouched behind a fallen log, studying. The poachers camped through binoculars. Their weeks of careful planning had led to this moment. The camp's layout was exactly as they had mapped it. 6 large metal cages arranged in a semicircle, a central campfire now reduced to embers, and to guards playing cards under a dim electric lantern. Remember the plan, Elena whispered, checking her medical kit one last time. I'll handle the sedated animals while you deal with the locks. 20 minutes max. Red nodded, his military training flooding back as he surveyed their approach route. The weight of the bolt cutters felt reassuring against his back. In his pocket, a small digital camera would capture the evidence they needed. They had chosen this night carefully. The camp's main crew was away on a supply run, leaving only the skeleton watch. A quarter moon provided just enough light to move by without making them obvious targets. Now, Rhett breathed as one guard stood up to stretch. They moved like shadows across the uneven ground, using the natural contours of the land for cover. The first cage loomed before them. Inside, a young mountain lion paced restlessly. Elena produced a small flashlight, checking the animal's condition. Light sedation, she murmured. Good, she'll be able to move on her own. Rhett worked quickly. With the bolt cutters, the metal giving way with a muffled snap. The mountain lion hesitated only briefly before slipping into the darkness, her movement barely rustling the underbrush. They progressed methodically from cage to cage. To timber wolves, heavily scarred but alert, a pair of bobcats, including the mate of Rhett's old friend, a rare ocelot that Elena said must have been smuggled up from Mexico. With each liberation, Rhett documented everything, the conditions, identifying marks that would connect these cages to Gavin's operation. The guards remained oblivious, their card game and whispered arguments masking the subtle sounds of freedom being granted. Elena worked with practiced efficiency, checking each animal's condition before release, ensuring they were strong enough to flee. Last one, Rhett whispered. Moving toward the largest cage, inside, a black bear cub whimpered softly. Elena's face hardened at the sight of it. They were probably waiting for a buyer, these monsters. The lock on this cage was newer, requiring more force. Rhett gritted his teeth as he squeezed the handles. The snap seemed louder this time, too loud. Hey, what was that? The guard's chair scraped against dirt as they stood up. Flashlight beams cut through the darkness. Keep going, Elena urged, positioning herself between Rhett and the approaching lights. Rhett redoubled his efforts on the lock. Behind him, he could hear the guard's boots crunching closer. The bear cub pressed itself against the back of its cage. Frightened by the commotion, the lock finally gave way just as a shout rang out. Over there. Elena moved with surprising speed, throwing a handful of gravel in the opposite direction. The guard's light swung toward the sound. In that moment of confusion, Rhett yanked the cage door open. The bear cub bolted past him into the forest. Run. Elena grabbed his arm, pulling him toward their escape route. Gunshots cracked through the night. Rhett pushed Elena ahead of him, using his larger frame to shield her as they crashed through the underbrush. Their planned escape route took them down a steep incline, making pursuit difficult for anyone who didn't know the terrain. More shots rang out, splintering tree bark around them. Rhett's combat instincts took over. He pulled Elena behind a large boulder, waiting until the guards had to reload. In that brief pause, they sprinted to the next position of cover. They could hear the guards cursing as they struggled down the slope, calling for backup on their radios. But Rhett and Elena had planned well. Their truck was hidden just a quarter mile away, positioned for a quick escape. Elena stumbled on a route, but Rhett caught her before she fell. They couldn't afford any delays now. The sound of engines in the distance told them that reinforcements were already on the way. Almost there, Rhett encouraged, helping Elena over a fallen tree. They burst out of the tree line where their truck waited. Elena jumped into the passenger seat while Rhett ran to the driver's side. The engine roared to life just as headlights appeared on the road above them. Rhett threw the truck into gear, taking them down the back trail they had scouted earlier. The rough terrain would slow down any pursuit, and they had multiple alternate routes planned if needed. After 15 minutes of careful driving with the lights off, Rhett finally allowed himself to breathe normally. Beside him, Elena was already reviewing the photos on their camera. We got everything, she said, her voice tight with controlled excitement. The cages, the contraband medicines, even shipping labels with Gavin's Shell Company names. Rhett guided the truck onto a paved road, finally switching on the headlights. Any injuries? Elena shook her head. Nothing serious. The animals were all strong enough to escape. That cub especially. Did you see how fast it moved once it had the chance? Like it had been waiting for that moment, Rhett agreed. He could still hear the wolves' soft padding as they disappeared into the forest, the graceful leap of the bobcats as they found their freedom. Each escape felt like a small victory against Gavin's cruelty. They had planned to split up after the raid, but Rhett found himself reluctant to let Elena out of his sight until he was certain they hadn't been followed. He took a longer route to her clinic, watching their mirrors carefully. What we did tonight, Elena said softly as they pulled up to her building. It's just the beginning, isn't it? Rhett nodded, his jaw set with determination. Gavin will know it was us. He'll try to retaliate, but now we have proof, real evidence, of what he's doing. And there's more to find. I'm sure of it. Elena gathered her medical kit, then surprised him by reaching over and squeezing his hand. We'll find it together. All of it. All of it. As he watched her disappear into her clinic, Rhett felt a familiar presence. There, at the edge of the parking lot's light, sat the scarred bobcat, its mate appear beside it. And for a moment, both cats regarded him with what seemed like approval. Then they melted away into the shadows, leaving Red alone with the weight of what they had accomplished and what was still to come. The moment of triumph shattered, as harsh floodlights suddenly blazed to life, bathing the camp in blinding white light. Engines roared as 3 pickup trucks burst through the tree line, tires spitting gravel. Rhett's heart plummeted as he recognized Gavin's silver F-50 in the lead. "Elena, run!" Rhett shouted. But it was too late. Armed men poured from the vehicles, moving with practiced efficiency. A shot cracked through the air, and Rhett felt white-hot pain tear through his thigh. He stumbled, falling hard against a cage. Elena screamed as 2 men grabbed her arms, twisting them behind her back. She fought like a wildcat, kicking and struggling, but they were too strong. One of them struck her across the face, silencing her resistance. Now, Gavin's smooth voice cut through the chaos as he stepped into the light. "Is that any way to treat our guest?" He was impeccably dressed despite the late hour, as if he'd been waiting for this moment. His cold smile sent chills down Rhett's spine. Rough hands seized Rhett, dragging him to his knees despite his wounded leg. Blood soaked through his jeans, but the pain was nothing compared to the sick feeling in his gut as he watched Gavin approach. "Elena," the local vet, Gavin mused, reaching out to grip Elena's chin. "I must admit, I didn't expect you to be mixed up in this, though I suppose bleeding hearts tend to find each other." He released her with a dismissive flick of his wrist, turning to Rhett. Gavin's facade of civility cracked. Hatred blazed in his eyes as he drove his fist into Rhett's stomach. "You never did know your place," he snarled, landing another blow. "A nobody, a construction worker who thought he deserved my sister." Rhett doubled over, gasping for air. Through the pain, he saw Elena struggling against her captors, tears streaming down her face. "Leave him alone," she shouted. "Shut her up," Gavin ordered, and one of his men roughly gagged Elena with a bandana. She made muffled sounds of protest as they bound her hands with zip ties. Gavin crouched down in front of Rhett, grabbing a fistful of his hair to force eye contact. "You know what your problem is, Rhett? You think you're better than me. Better than all this." He gestured at the camp around them, a man who can't even protect his own wife. Playing at being a hero, the words cut deeper than any physical blow. Rhett struggled against the hands holding him down, but it was useless. His leg wound had weakened him too much. "Tie him up properly," Gavin commanded. "I want him to watch this." His men forced Rhett's arms behind his back, securing them with painful tightness. They propped him against a boulder, ensuring he had a clear view of Elena. Gavin drew a handgun from his jacket, checking it with casual precision. "You know, I've always believed in poetry. There's something fitting about you dying out here, where no one will ever find you. Just like my dear sister." He smiled that cold smile again. "Though her accident was much cleaner, this will be messier." Elena's eyes were wide with terror above her gag, but she held her head high, refusing to look away from Gavin. Her courage made Rhett's heart ache. She was in this position because she had believed in him, had trusted him to do the right thing. Now they would both die for it. "I think we'll start with your friend here," Gavin said, moving toward Elena. "Consider it payment for all the trouble you've caused me." He pressed the barrel of the gun against her temple. Rhett struggled frantically against his bonds, ignoring the fire in his leg and the bite of the zip ties into his wrist. "Gavin, please," he begged, hating the desperation in his voice, but unable to stop himself. "She has nothing to do with this. It's me you want." "Oh, I'll get to you," Gavin assured him. "But first, I want you to understand the cost of crossing me, of thinking you could ever be anything more than the dirt beneath my boots." The night air was thick with tension as Gavin's finger tightened on the trigger. Elena closed her eyes, a single tear rolling down her cheek. Rhett had never felt more helpless, more utterly defeated. Everything he'd tried to build, every step toward justice and redemption, had led them here, to this moment of darkness and despair. Gavin pulled a sleek black handgun from his jacket, the metal gleaming under the harsh floodlights. "You know," he said, leveling the weapon at Rhett's chest, "I've waited years for this moment. No one will question another tragic accident out here in the wilderness." But before he could pull the trigger, a blur of tawny fur exploded from the shadows. The scarred Bobcat launched itself through the air with a bone-chilling screech. Razor-sharp claws extended. It slammed into the nearest henchman, sending him sprawling with a terrified yell. Blood sprayed as the Bobcat's claws raked across his face. Chaos erupted. The other men scattered, shouting in panic. In their confusion, they loosened their grip on Elena. She wrenched free, dropping and rolling away from the mayhem. Rhett seized his chance. Ignoring the searing pain in his thigh, he surged upward, tackling Gavin before he could aim the gun. They crashed to the ground in a tangle of limbs. The weapon skittered away across the dirt. "You're nothing," Gavin spat, driving his knee into Rhett's wounded leg. You'll always be nothing. Rhett gritted his teeth against the agony, his military training flooding back. He blocked Gavin's wild punch and countered with a devastating elbow strike to the jaw. Bone crunched under the impact. Around them, the camp had descended into bedlam. The Bobcat was a force of nature, darting between the men with savage grace. Its mate, freed earlier by Rhett and Elena, joined the fray. Together, the two cats drove the henchmen back, keeping them from reaching their fallen weapons. Gavin fought with the desperate fury of a cornered animal, landing a solid blow to Rhett's ribs. But Rhett had survived worse. He carried the weight of loss and injustice for years, and now all that pent-up rage found its target. This is for Sarah. Rhett growled, smashing his fist into Gavin's face. For the animals, another crushing blow. For everyone you've hurt with your greed. Blood poured from Gavin's broken nose as he tried to crawl away. But Rhett wasn't finished. He seized Gavin's collar, hauling him up. You killed your own sister, Rhett said, his voice raw with emotion. Your own blood, just for money. You can't prove anything, Gavin wheezed. But fear had replaced the arrogance in his eyes suddenly. New lights pierced the darkness. Multiple vehicles roared into the camp, and voices shouted federal agents, everyone freeze. Elena had managed to reach their hidden satellite phone during the chaos. Now, heavily armed federal agents swarmed the area, weapons trained on Gavin's men. The Bobcats melted away into the shadows, their work done. Actually, a stern-faced agent said, approaching with handcuffs, we can prove everything. She held up a thumb drive, the one containing all the evidence Rhett and Elena had gathered. Financial records, emails, witness statements about your sister's death. It's over, Mr. Morrow. Gavin sagged in defeat as the cuffs clicked around his wrist. His carefully constructed world of privilege and corruption crumbled around him. The other agents rounded up his men, reading them their rights. Rhett stumbled as the adrenaline faded, his leg wound making itself known again. But Elena was there, supporting him with gentle hands. In the distance, he caught a glimpse of the Bobcats watching from the tree line, a final acknowledgement, before they vanished into their wilderness home. I can't believe that actually worked, Elena said softly, helping Rhett sit on a nearby crate as paramedics rushed over. I had help, Rhett replied, thinking of the scarred Bobcat that had once again come to his aid. Sometimes, he realized, salvation came in the most unexpected forms, and sometimes justice, like nature itself, found a way to restore balance. Gavin sprawled unconscious at Rhett's feet, his expensive suit now caked with dirt and blood. In the distance, sirens wailed through the canyon, growing louder. The flashing red and blue lights of federal vehicles illuminated the trees as they wound their way up the access road. Rhett's body ached with every breath, but a profound sense of peace washed over him. Elena appeared at his side, her warm hand finding his, despite her disheveled appearance and the cuts on her face. Her eyes shone with pride and something deeper, something that made his heart skip a beat. We did it, she whispered, squeezing his hand together. They surveyed the wreckage of the camp. Empty cages lay scattered and broken. The poachers' equipment was strewn about, and their vehicles sat abandoned. Several of Gavin's men lay groaning on the ground, subdued by the federal agents now swarming the scene. A gentle breeze carried the scent of sage and desert flowers. As dawn approached, the sky began to lighten, painting the canyon walls in soft shades of pink and gold. Movement on the ridge caught Rhett's attention. There, silhouetted against the brightening sky, stood the scarred Bobcat. Its mate waited a few feet behind, both creatures poised with wild dignity. The Bobcat's amber eyes met Rhett's, and in that moment, time seemed to stand still. Years of pain, loss, and isolation crystallized into this single point of connection. The same creature he had freed from a snare so long ago had returned to save him, completing a circle of compassion that defied explanation. With a slight tilt of its head, almost like a nod, the Bobcat turned away. Its mate followed, and together they disappeared into the wilderness, their tawny forms melting into the landscape like morning mist. Elena leaned against Rhett's shoulder. That was incredible, she said softly. I've never seen anything like it. The way they came back to help us, Rhett corrected, wrapping an arm around her shoulders. The simple gesture felt right, natural, as if they'd been standing this way for years rather than minutes. Federal agents approached, their boots crunching on the rocky ground. Mr. Callahan? Dr. Ruiz? We'll need your statements, one said, notebook in hand. But first, let's get you both checked out by the medics. As they walked toward the waiting ambulance, Rhett felt the weight of years lifting from his shoulders. His wife's death was no longer a burden of guilt, but a truth finally brought to light. Gavin's cruelty and corruption would be exposed, and justice would be served, not just for her, But for all the creatures he had exploited, Elena's steady presence beside him sparked something he hadn't dared feel in years: hope. He looked down at her, seeing the same emotion reflected in her eyes. She had believed in him when no one else would, had stood beside him against impossible odds. In her, he saw not just an ally or friend, but a future filled with possibility. "What happens now?" she asked as a paramedic began cleaning the cut above her eyebrow. Rhett watched the sunrise paint the canyon in ever-brightening colors. "Now," he said, taking her hand once more, "we build something new, together." The word hung in the air between them, full of promise. Where once there had been emptiness and grief, now stood the foundation of something stronger, a bond forged in courage, compassion, and unwavering trust. As the morning light flooded the canyon, it illuminated not just the end of one chapter, but the beautiful beginning of another. Their fingers remained intertwined as they sat in the back of the ambulance, watching federal agents lead a handcuffed Gavin toward their vehicles. The man who had once seemed so powerful now looked small and defeated, his carefully constructed world of privilege and cruelty crumbling around him. But Rhett's thoughts weren't on Gavin anymore. They were on the gentle pressure of Elena's hand, in his, on the way her presence made him feel whole again, and on the mysterious ways that acts of kindness could echo through the years, returning when needed most. Like the Bobcat, he had found his way back from the wilderness of grief to something beautiful and unexpected. A second chance at love, at life, at everything. Thank you for watching. If even one moment stayed with you, don't forget to subscribe. I'll be here tomorrow with another story that speaks to the heart.